Welcome to Kind Connections, a safe place to be curious. I'm your host, James Fauntleroy, and it's so good to see all of you guys joining with me today. I have a very special guest with me today, and it's somebody that I've been wanting to speak with. And this person's a member of a group that I would like to learn more from. And I think it's really important that we get to know the people who are really the original stewards of this land because I think once we get to know them a little bit better, then we'll be able to connect ourselves more, not just to our own people, but also to the best parts of ourselves. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce activist, advocate, organizer, as well as Native American Joy Peltier to the stage. So good to have you here with me.
Ani Buju, Ernest Joseph Upperguard Peltier III, Indigenaka, Makadewa, Makandunjum, Indunjanaba, Mikanakwa, Ijiji, Niniweg, Bajigama. Hi, hello, I'm Ernest or Joy Peltier. I'm from the Black Bear clan of the Turtle Mountain Band of Anishinaabe, and I live in Bemidji, Minnesota. And thank you for having me on as one of your first guests for this series of yours. I really appreciate it. And we have a lot to unpack today. I know you have some questions for me, and I have a lot to share.
Yeah. So, one of my first questions was as far as being native, what is one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about people who are Native Americans? Because I don't get to meet very many in real life. And that's for obvious purposes, right? Obvious reasons that, the what the US has done really because we talk about the Gaza genocide, but have we talked about the American genocide of your people? And so, what is one misconception that a lot of people tend to miss about Native Americans?
That we still exist. You brought up the genocide of the Native American tribal people, and the misconception is that we're no longer here. We don't or we don't have no ownership or guardianship over this land anymore. And I'm here to straight up tell everyone, we still exist. You saw us during Line 3, you saw us during No Dapple. We are a thriving civilization even to this day, despite all of the colonial interference and the land grab, the mineral grab, and our labor and our medicine and sciences. We still exist. We still resist, and we want our land back. And second on to that, another misconception is what is land back? And my sister puts it beautifully. We're not asking for people to leave. We're not asking for all of the colonizers, the Europeans, and the folks that they brought over here to just leave. We want to have governance, we want to have say, and we want to be able to be the rightful custodians of Turtle Island.
Thank you very much for that, because I think that was a fear among many people is that when they call for land back, it's basically kicking out the anybody that's migrated here or that was kidnapped and forced here, like my ancestors. And so I think it's important that people know what land back really means. And so I appreciate you, really just like giving us an overview of that. One of the things that I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the ideas of how we govern in a democratic society came from Native American culture. Is there any validity to that? And is if so, if you can give, do you have any details regarding when it comes to the governing process of how Native American nations, how they operated, and how it's being imitated today in some way, shape, or form?
The United States Constitution was based off of the Iroquois Confederacy, the documents themselves. So yes, the structural makeup of the colony itself is based off of indigenous governance. And further into that, not a lot of people or know and realize that Marxist, he based a lot of his economic and governance off of indigenous nations as well.
Wow.
We James, we've had thriving governance, sciences, communities, and custodialship over this land for centuries. And you have the European colonizers come in, put their colony here, and they collapse the system every 4 to 8 years. We end up bailing everybody out. So it only makes sense. We have a track record of centuries of stable growth and stable governance and stable society, that we only go back to that governance.
Wow. Okay. So this things are starting to make a lot more sense now. You realize, within the realm of how Native American culture operates, especially when it comes to governance, because I'm blanking on her name. Please forgive me if you ever see this, but there were two natives from California that I was speaking to. It was during the trial for the Uhuru 3 in Tampa against Omali Ishatella, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville. And I actually had lunch with them. It was literally like a 3-hour lunch, and we were just talking about Native American culture. And I was just trying to drink in as much as I could about culture. And one of the things that she told me was that, because a lot of times we think about, as far as hierarchy goes, like a lot of people, a lot of us on the left may talk about things like hierarchy between genders, right? How we have patriarchy here, especially in Western cultures and things like that. And one of the things that she mentioned was that in a lot of Native American nations, it's like, yes, the chief was a male, but that male was chosen by the elder females of the tribe. And it was chosen because they watched him as he grew up from a baby boy up into a man. And they chose who was within that government based on their personality, as well as who would be good where. So they knew who people were through and through by the time they said, okay, we collectively think that that person will be the right person to be the chief. So is there any is there any convergence in what she told me and what you have always known growing up as a native?
Starting off, I like how you put Native American nations with a plural, because we are not a monolith. We are several, prior to colonizations, thousands of different indigenous nations across Turtle Island, with thousands of different belief systems and governance systems that we engaged in. Myself, I'm Anishinaabe, one of the Great Lakes tribes over here in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and so forth, also into Canada. We are actually one of the largest nations prior to colonization. And we even broke ourselves up into smaller communities, because it wasn't a large governance system. It was a series of micro governance through your community. So direct democracy. And further on the direct democracy part of this, yes, we had chiefs, and yes, we still to this day honor hereditary chief lines, but it wasn't necessarily gender based. A lot of our chiefs are gender based, although you will find two-spirited individuals. A colonized word for that would be a transgendered individual within our communities that has been elevated to that spot. And within my culture, the chief are the poorest people within the community. They're the ones that are giving out the gifts and making sure that everyone else is taken care of before themselves. And then pivoting back to that direct democracy, I started off with my introduction, Aning Buju, my name, Indunjanaba Mikanakwa Jiji and Niniwe, which means I am a person of the Black Bear clan. We had a clan system within the Anishinaabe, and of course, across Turtle Island, the other nations as well have clan systems and did direct democracy through those clan systems. And how we participated within democracy within those clans is that each individual person within their clan, so Black Bear clan, everybody of my family within that clan has a voice, has a vote. And if there's one person that says no, the whole clan says no until they're willing to come to an agreement. And if one clan of that community says no, then the whole community says no. So it has to be not a majority vote, it has to be an all vote. And that's something that
Unanimous.
yep, and that's something that the European settlers and colonizers had an issue with. Because when you have one chief, one president, one person, or a small body, a council that governs your community, it's easy for them to come in and pay them a bunch of money, pay them a bunch of resources, or get violent with them, lock them up, and then say that they did this. And so during the time of colonization, those folks that were singled out as our chiefs or our councils, some were democratically elected, but
Okay.
a lot of those were forced onto us by the United States colonial government. Prior to that, also the England government that came over here first, and that was strictly so that it didn't take 2 years to come to an agreement with this tribe. It took 6 months. That was the time to travel to DC or travel to Minneapolis, wherever the negotiations were being held, and then strong arm that council or that person into the decisions that the colonizers want. And that's
Colonialism.
a huge part of our land theft was done through that, and a huge part of our treaties were done through those mechanisms.
So basically, the same thing we'd see with imperialism abroad, right? They'll install a puppet, right? And so they basically started with doing it to install their own chief, and then that chief would do the bidding of the puppet master. At the time, it was England, then it turned to the United States. And so they would do their bidding and then turn the land over to the United States. And the United States got to grow its territory, especially westward. And so we have the United States as we have it today. And it's really no different than what they're trying to do. Like, for instance, in Venezuela, when they try to install somebody like Juan Guaido to basically be the head of Venezuela, even though that person wasn't democratically elected. Instead, the people wanted to go with Maduro. And so it's the same thing. Oh my gosh, this look, history may not repeat itself, but it rhymes like crazy here.
The tactics of colonialization have been perfected over 500 years. And the
Wow.
same tactics that had been in play during the original colonization of the Americas have
Mhm.
only continued on through other nations across Mama, Key Mother Earth. And we see that, for instance, Palestine. We see that directly with Palestine on how the same tactics of cultural erasure and then also food
Mhm.
erasure.
Oh
We
yeah.
relate as indigenous nations, more so the Nakota tribes, with the buffalo erasure, the mass extinction or mass slaughtering of our buffalo, our food source, as similar to the Palestinians' burning of their olive trees, their food source. And that realize now those Palestinians are being starved out. And that's what we occurred during pre or early colonial stages, and how we came about with, for instance, the commodity system through the federal government to our tribes. That was an agreement through treaties. So our people would be fed in perpetuity, um, which means for the rest of all time, um, because we understood these tactics that are being played against us. And even, we were not stupid as a nation and as a race. Native Americans had science. We knew the stars, and we knew governance. And when we made our first original treaties, and if you would like to look up later on the wampum belt, it's a double row um, beaded belt that the wampum tribe did in treaty negotiations with England. And how that belt looks at it's a solid white line, if I remember right, a solid blue line, a solid white line, and another solid blue line. And that represented through, this is treaty, this is actual treaty without text. This is how it was originally done. The two line the lines represented that we can coexist with each other, line on line, but we are not to intermingle through governance. We're not meant to intermingle as in colonizing one another, but we were there to coexist with each other. So we never claimed ownership of the land, because that to a lot of Native American tribes is a foreign concept. And to be real, the state system that was created has only been in place for roughly 70, 80 years. So, when we hear there was never a state, a Palestinian state, well, prior to the invasion, prior to the Nakba, there was no infrastructure or no policy or no legislation or no global agreement of what a nation state looks like or what a nation actually consisted of. So when we talk about, like, we don't have that concept of land ownership, we have a concept of land stewardship. It was our direct instructions from our creators. And I say creators because, like, we're not a monolith. We have multiple different religions. We hesitate even to say religion because religion is such a colonized word. But we had several different types of spiritualities that we engaged in. My creator is Gichimanadu, which means the Great Spirit. And I'm sorry, James, I can't get too deep into my nation's creation story because, first of all, I'm a learner, so I'm still learning that stuff. And then we have protocols on how we can actually engage in certain type of everything. But in this particular situation, within talking about our creation stories, we're not allowed to talk about our creation stories without snow on the ground. And people are like, snow on the ground? In our belief, in our spirituality, the monadus, the spirits, are not able to traverse, to move freely when there's snow on the ground. And when we talk about their creation stories, the monadus around us get energized and they feel that story and they feel the remembrance of Gichi Manadu on earth and doing his work. So it's one of our protocols within the Anishinaabe spirituality that we're not allowed to, but I can cover different type protocols and different other stories throughout the Anishinaabe lineage. So don't hesitate to ask me on that. I will cover as much as I can. You're on mute.
Yeah, so I do want to make sure I honor that because that is what's deeply important. And thank you very much for letting me know that. One of the things that I also wanted to embrace. I'm trying to be very intentional with my words because I want to make sure that I'm very respectful and honoring our Native American brethren on this land because we are guests, right? Um, One of the things that I hold space for in my heart now is one of the things that I learned from this beautiful human that was teaching me for 3 hours over lunch. And I'm trying not to get emotional because it just hits that deep. It was a phrase that she told me. Um, she said that we don't own the land owns us.
Hmm.
That was the deepest thing I have ever heard, but it makes so much sense. And in my mind, because I know that I am a descendant of tribes in Africa, or I should say nations in Africa, the same way you're a descendant of nations from the, from Native America, right? And whether it be Igbo um, or different tribes from like Bantu, whatever. I did my ancestry, so that's why I'm saying these things. But I feel like that is also a saying in Native African nations too. That
Hmm.
we don't own the land owns us. So then that's why there wasn't really borders before. And so it comes into my head. It's like that's the case. It makes perfect sense if, say, a fox, right, is on the Mexican border that the colonialists have drawn, and a fox just crosses it because it doesn't recognize that because it doesn't own the land, but the land owns it.
Hmm.
And so it's like, why should I place arbitrary lines that the earth did not even designate for me?
Hmm.
Like the lines for me would be where the ocean is technically, and even then I can still get going there. So why am I going to feel like that's not my territory? Though Earth is my territory.
But James, just as much as there were there were no lines, but there were agreements over areas and time sharing agreements on those areas. Um, my tribe originally comes from the East Coast, New York area, and we migrated because of our spirituality, because of the prophets. Excuse me, if someone can Google this, is actually on my organization's page for our Michigan site. But I want to say it's the seven prophets who gave us our teachings, told us that we would go to where the food grew on the water. And for anyone that knows what kind of food grows on the water, it's rice. And the only rice, well, heck, the only grain of North America and South America is our wild rice that's predominantly found in the Great Lakes area. And that's how we ended up coming over here to Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and North Dakota, and then all the way into Manitoba, Alberta, all of not Alberta, excuse me, that's too far, but um, that's how we came over here. And the original people of where I'm at currently is actually the Dakota Lakota tribes, and we had to negotiate. We sparred. I say it's with a weak tone as sparring rather than battling, because the types of engagements that we had weren't meant to kill one of each other. It was more so it was actually a dishonor to kill someone on the battlefield. A lot of our tribes had the morality to take prisoners of war, prisoners of these battles, and they would become, I hate to say it, indentured servants for a period of time, which is usually up to a year. And then after that year is done, they have the decision to either go back to their home tribal nation, or come be part of us. And during that first year, it's not the chattel slavery that we're akin to. It's more of, we have another person to take care of, another person that's gonna be providing food, picking berries, taking care of our community with us. And it was a mutual understanding. You lost in battle, so here, this is your task for the next year. We have treaties prior to colonization with the Dakota people for being here in Minnesota, and onward east. If you understand the reservations lines, the closest Lakota reservations are the Lower and Upper Sioux on the western part of Minnesota, and then going into North Dakota, South Dakota, and further west on. And it was originally because we had pushed them, but secondary, because we would do timeshare. I know it's such a colonial word to say, timeshare, but we would share hunting grounds. One season, we inherently knew that this was ours, and then at the end of that season, we'd leave it in the repair, or in the state that we got it, or better, and then we'd move on to our next hunting grounds, our gathering grounds, and the next community over would take over that spot, do what they had normally historically done over their hunting and their gathering, yeah, it'd be just common time sharing. There was no actual borders. There were no physical lines set. It was more on the seasons and on our spirituality when we would be in certain spots. Furthermore, I liked how you put that. Um, your own tribal nations over in Africa. And I remember during line 3, when we were opening up the Camp McGeezy over on the western part of Minnesota, the camp leader, she opened her camp, saying to all of the folks in attendance, "I'm not here to give you my beads and my pearls, but I'm here to help you find yours." And that's something that always struck in my head. It's all of us, even the European settlers, at one point in time, they were tribal people, just like you and I in our cultures. They were once tribal people, and they themselves were colonized. And one of the easiest examples of a European colony would be Ireland. But even prior to Ireland, the reason why we no longer have Vikings is because of the Roman Catholic Church and their monasteries all across Europe being attacked by these villages, these raiders. And it's such a, to me, it's a derogatory term to call them raiders when you pushed them out of their lands and you pushed them out of their resources, and all they have left is to pillage and raid the thriving communities around it. So I like to open that up when I'm actually talking to our white allies, because it helps them remember that, yeah, we were tribal people once. We had direct democracy. We had community democracy and sovereignty. And I am an Anishinaabe spirituality, and no offense to any of the Arabic religion followers in the chat or in viewing this, but to me, the biggest colonial attempt on this earth has been the 3 Arabic religions and the bastardization of those religions, because they were once originally peace-loving, kind religions, and they were adapted within the colonization structures that we have currently. And
Yeah.
it's sad to see that. And I've personally made my peace with the Catholic Church, and what they've done to us. But I understand that even to this day, that institution itself is as corrupt as the American government.
Mhm. Definitely, definitely. One thing you said about the use of the land and what with sharing that land between two nations. It reminds me of kind of like a general purpose building in a community that's owned by the community. And it's like, okay, so we're going to be having our birthday party on this day. And then, oh, you guys are having a meeting on there the next day. So we have to make sure that we clean it up and make it either as good as or better than we left it. So that when you guys come to use the building the next day at the designated time that we agreed upon, then now you have use to the building. The only difference is it's not a building, it's the land.
Mm. And
So
I would
it's
even go
communal
as far
land.
I'd even go as far as saying like the two different cultures, the Anishinaabe and the Dakota Lakotas cultures, they complemented each other so well that our herbs and our vegetation and the common wildlife that we would hunt and gather was fundamentally different than the Lakota and the Sioux. So we would come in for our vegetation and our animals that we'd culturally go after and ceremonially go harvest, and they'd come in and do the same for theirs, and we'd build each other up because we're not taking all of the nutrients and all the resources of the land, but we are helping one side grow as we take the other side, and
It's a
it's that
symbiotic
balance.
relationship, right? Yeah.
Yep. And
That's beautiful.
it's something that I always find interesting when I hang out with our Lakota relatives, and we get talking about the different herbs and medicines that we use, and it's like, well, we use this for toothaches, but you use that for toothaches. That's cool to know that we have two different medicines that come from two different plants for the same issue,
Hmm.
and and that also dovetails into the fact that we didn't strip the land of all of its resources. We found other resources that did the same beneficial effects for us.
Wow, that's beautiful. And that's
And
another.
sorry, the time sharing also was done on a spiritual note, because our nations were based off of spirituality. And let's root the indigenous folks of Turtle Island on that knowledge. So our governance, our our food, our science was all based off of our spirituality, and that's how we integrated um, living within the Turtle Island and coexisting with all of the beings of Turtle Island itself. And that's also where when settlers came in, we didn't at first we didn't feel threatened by them. We opened our hands and our families and offered them, salvage
Yeah.
and security, and we taught them how to wash their own butts too. A
Yeah, I mean, it's your very nature to be welcoming and allowing people to experience your culture. That's, I mean, and truth be told, I mean, that's the beautiful part of many indigenous cultures. I mean, look, I when I think about it and bringing it back to what happened in Palestine, they were living in harmony, like Jewish people, Muslims, Christians, they were living all in harmony before the Nakba that happened in 1948. And so that harmony is really a tenet of indigenous tribes that I've seen. I haven't heard of an indigenous tribe just be totally rejecting. The only ones that I know of are rejecting are the ones that are still around today that are that they may have heard from other tribes. Oh my God, these people they're not to be messed with because they're going to try to wipe you out, and so this is why they're like, stay away because we don't want to be wiped out. But it's out of fear because of what has been done to other indigenous tribes, and it's a response. But outside of that, it's just like, oh, here's a fellow human.
Mm.
Welcome.
To push back a little bit on that thought, and if anyone watching wants to correct me later on, I believe the Aztec were a genocidal race, and
Oh,
also they had morals and principles integrated. So I don't want to totally slam the Aztec descendants, but from my understanding, the other nations of Turtle Island, of South and Central America, had to address that nation and their genocidal tactics and tendencies, and that's how originally the Spaniards started integrating with the indigenous folks of that area, is because the Spaniards helped us out, um, calling that culture and that nation to becoming balkanized and part of our other indigenous nations in the area.
oh, wow. Okay.
But again, James, I encourage everyone to do their own research and prove me wrong, because that's we're still we're still trying to find out what was a colonial teaching versus what was the actual truth and the history of our tribal nations, and not just Turtle Island, North America, but Central and South America as well. And well, even going beyond just these two continents, over in Africa, um, West Asia, Asia, and
Hmm.
the rest. So,
Gotcha. Thank you very much for that. Another thing I wanted to discuss, because there's two things that I wanted to get to. One of the things that I was asking about was that because a lot of people are talking about people who may be neurodivergent, right? People who may have things like autism. And now I'm realizing the way people's brains operate is not a new occurrence. It's something that's been going on for many years. And so one of the things that I was told was that, and I think she was speaking more particularly about her nation, was that they would look at somebody, and if their brain worked a certain way, they embraced them and they loved on them even more and said, okay, they're good at this, so we're going to make sure that they are in this part doing this type of work for the people in this area. And it always was looking for what are they good at,
mm,
even if it's just good at, allowing us to have some type of enjoyment out of life, right? Then that's their sector, and so it was almost like a figuring out like who are you and how you fit in our society. Instead of telling you who you are, we want to know who you are.
mm,
So is that kind of jive well with your experience in your nation?
mm. So, from what I've heard from the Alaskan tribes, that folks with developmentally disabled, autism, neurodivergent, um, they saw those individuals as closer to the Monadus, to their spirits,
Hmm.
and I relate that to a lot on how the Anishinaabe view our two-spirited individuals, such as myself, that we are closer to the Monadus, that we hold, um, a special position, a higher ranking position within our spirituality to our community. Um, so those individuals that we held in our community that were neurodivergent, we saw them as if they were closer to our spirituality, closer to our creation. And yes, they were honored within our communities. As in, roles and responsibilities of them. I'm not too sure on those individuals within my community, what roles they played. I'm assuming a lot along the lines as what their clan duties and roles are. We had a conversation about clans earlier. Um, my clan, the Black Bear clan, are holders of cultural knowledge, advocates, guardians, and of that sort, and educators. So we held those positions within our communities. Um, I would say much alike our clans, they would follow those roles as well.
So you mentioned people who are two spirit, which we know is the more colonial term as people who may be trans or non-binary. And one thing I've heard as well is that in Native American nations, and really not just Native American nations, but uh, in African nations, right? And I'm talking about pre-colonial African nations, is that people who what we know today as LGBTQ, right? They held a higher, more elevated spiritual position because of who they were. And it wasn't because they dominated or anything like that. It was because they were seen as, oh, you get both perspectives in some way, shape, or form, rather than us being kind of skewed more one side or the other. And so you have it's almost like um it's almost like a you know what's the best way I can put it? It's almost like a uh I'm trying to be careful with my language too. It's almost like a cat having the purview of what's going on the ground versus a squirrel having a view of what's going on high up in the trees. And then you have the eagle that has a purview for something way higher than them. And they're able to see further out than, say, the cat. And so it's kind of like that. It's like one's not better than the other, but one can see further and see the dimensions of humanity much more further than the rest. And so people who may either be a non-binary or a transgender or some type of queer, they're able to see the spectrum of humanity further than the rest of us. And it kind of feels like that's the way it was explained to me as why they're seen as more regarded spiritually than definitely than they are would be within the colonial system we have today.
Mm. You know what, James? What they say about having two heads being better than one. So, a two-spirited, the word, I can't remember the Anishinaabe word. The terminology actually comes around early 1980, no, 1990s, late 1980s. Two-spirited, the term itself. The Anishinaabe Moan, excuse me, the Ojibwe term for that was culturally acceptable within our culture. And the term itself, Two Spirit, derives from the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe language itself. So prefacing all of that, that actually comes from my nation. Just saying, and where that term Two Spirit comes from is we do have gender roles within our communities. The fire keepers and the water bearers, and those are the spirits that we hold within ourselves. Our women are water barriers, so that's why you see a lot of Native American women fighting for our water, fighting for our communities. You start off in your mother's stomach within her water, within her, and she's the birth giver. And then as for our male, our fire keepers, they're more of a masculine and protectors and hunters and gatherers. Within my spirituality, the individuals that have two spirits, two is better than one, James. Two is better than one. It means you have twice as much spirit within you that makes you closer to the Manadu, the Gichi Manadu, the Great Spirit. And saying that, we had roles, not just specific roles within whatever spirit you're flowing with on that day, because myself, I flow between both the fire and the water. It just depends on my day, the mood, my attitude, and whoever I'm hanging around. I usually sit more towards the water spirit than I do towards the fire, but I can get lippy and rowdy and physical if I need to. Although the roles that we played within the Anishinaabe communities, we were delegates, we were negotiators, we were the ambassadors from for other tribal nations. That was our role. We would go in there and negotiate terms and treaties and trades and different goods we'd exchange, and celebrations and holidays and prisoners of war and so forth. That was the role of the two-spirited individual within the Anishinaabe spirituality, within our clan systems and within our governance. And just saying again, in our spirituality, we elevated these folks as, I hate to say it, as under a medicine person, under a clergy, if you want to say it. Medicine man is a colonized term as well, because it wasn't specifically gender locked either. You had medicine women and medicine men. So yeah, James, that term, that elevation within prominence within your community, those roles and responsibilities, they all fell on you. And like I said earlier, it depends on what day, what leading spirit is pulling you on that day, is what cultural traditions, cultural roles that you participated in. So if I'm rolling more on a water day, I'm hanging out doing water ceremony with the ladies. If I'm rolling with my fire, my masculinity spirit, I'm able to play drum, and I'm able to be a fire keeper of our spiritual fire at our ceremonies and at our events. And the joys of being both is that you get to be part of both of those communities. You get both of those perspectives within your community. You have that male and you have that female fire, or that female spirit within you.
So it would be normal to see, like, for instance, the firekeepers, it would be like a majority male, but you may have some that are, as far as sex goes, female, but because their spirit is fire, then it's like, okay, well, you see them among the firekeepers. You may see a few sprinkled in there. And the same thing with the water bearers. You may see a couple who may be, as far as gender goes, male, but because they have that spirit within them, you may see them sprinkled among the females as well. But it's not gender, exclusive, or really sex exclusive, because gender and sex are two different things. A lot of people don't like to talk about it, but it is. but it's really about the spirit that person has within them.
Yes.
Okay.
It's that spirituality, and it further going into the spirituality aspect of it. So within the Anishinaabe culture, spirituality, our women are not allowed to play on grandfather drum, our big powwow drums.
Mm-hmm.
Their medicine, their water medicine, going into the drum itself will get the men who play that drum sick. And if you're two-spirited, though, you have that fire spirit to be able to pick up that stick and play the drum without getting the men folks sick. And it's likewise for men participating within water ceremony.
Hmm.
It wouldn't happen unless you're two-spirited. But if you go in there, if you go into a woman's moon tent, you're going to get sick. You're going to have that medicine that they're going through at that time going on to you and going on to your own spirit, and it will get you sick. And and that's it's more, it's not necessarily a gender lock. It's like you said, a spiritual lock. It's where your spirit finds itself. And to me, and a lot of other two spirits, we flow. Like I said, it depends on my mood. It depends on the day. Depends on who I'm around.
Okay. That is so fascinating. And it really is kind of like an understanding beyond what we think. And the crazy part is science is now starting to catch up with what native nations already knew back then,
Mm.
right? It feels like that. It's like, for instance, there are a lot of people who have this antiquated and outdated understanding of sex and gender. They'll say, well, there's only two sets of chromosomes, XX and XY. And then you actually research and you find out, oh, there's XXY or XYY or XYX. And then, or there's even variations among that. Then you have people who are intersex, who both male and female, genitalia. And so it's like, it feels like the natives already knew all this, and they already have, like, it's more of within yourself instead of just being purely biological. So it's so fascinating how it not seems, wrong word, but they were ahead of their time, or were they right at their time and we went backwards?
The homophobia that we see in the Western nations and later on within the other nations across Mama Key is a colonial construct. We hadn't seen this level of homophobia or transphobia or whatever sexuality phobia that we see nowadays 100 years ago, or even 120 years ago. This is something that is new within this previous century that we've gone through. And you touched it earlier on, and that's the patriarchy, that's the control that the Western colonization has implemented within our culture and society.
Yeah, that's something that I was always curious about. And I'm so glad we got to talk about this because it deepens my understanding. Because I read an article about African sexuality, especially pre-colonial African sexuality. And it's so interesting how in African nations, pre-colonial times, the ideas were the same.
Hmm.
The ideas were the same among Native Africans as well as Native Americans, that, oh, well, it's really about the spirit of the person. And even when it comes to things like, and now I'm starting to get in some scary territory because some people are going to be like, whoa, what's that? Relationship orientation, right? Because some people aren't necessarily uh, monogamous, right? Because monogamy is really a social construct too, because not everything in nature is monogamous either. And so, like, for instance, there are some African nations where women had multiple husbands. It's just that's the way it was. It doesn't make it wrong and it doesn't make it right. It's just different. And it's based on their culture and it's based on, how they view things. But it's like, I think it feels closer towards more of a thinking things in a spiritual, high-minded way versus it bringing it down to just physical. It. I'm trying to quantify it in words, and it's very difficult for me because I need to read a dictionary more. but it feels like there's a deeper spiritual understanding of human nature that we have ran away from, especially within colonized culture.
I think it's the control, and it's the colonized culture
Ooh.
control. We
Okay.
see
Yeah.
that the monogamy comes about to control and own the ownership of women, and not just within the African tribes, the Anishinaabe, my culture, were polyamorous as well. Not all individuals were polyamorous, but it wasn't something that we shunned upon. It wasn't
Okay.
something that was a minority of people. It was well practiced within our
Okay.
culture. And um, this is something that it's hard for Indigenous people to speak on because because of the church and their colonization attempts onto us, what they've done to our children,
Yeah.
and the rape culture that comes from the church. So even in this current era that we're in, if you talk to a boarding school survivor, some of them can't mentally handle the conversations around two-spirit individuals and have been colonized into hating those individuals, and that comes from their own trauma that was forced onto them by the Catholic Church itself. So it was something, like I said, homophobia is new to us over the last century. It was something so they could control us, and really, if you look at the numbers, it makes sense, that it's a control on women. The majority, the largest demographic within the LGBT community, at least within the United States, are women, lesbian women, and that's something within this culture that always irks me when people don't acknowledge that. And we always get the Pete Buttigieg or the Twinkie, blonde-headed, blue-eyed queer boy as the leaders of our movements and the leaders of our nonprofits or the leaders of whatever you have, because they are your stereotypical gay guy. But in all reality, the representation that needs to be there is for our women who make up the majority of the queer community. And then a larger demographic than our lesbian women is our Black trans women, who are at the highest risk of being murdered and physically assaulted.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for mentioning that, because I see a lot of people within the Black community that say protect Black women, but there's always an asterisk there, right? Because they mean protect cis Black women. They don't mean protect all Black women, including the trans ones. And when the trans ones are murdered, they're silent. And we have to realize there's somebody's baby too.
Mm.
There's somebody's there's somebody's sister, there's somebody's auntie, there's somebody's mom. And this is why I try to. I think once you see the humanity in every person and you divorce yourself from the colonized brainwashing that you've been subject to, and this is a constant battle for me, because I'm trying to decolonize my mind and I'm trying to re-indigenize my mind. I learned that a few weeks ago, so that I like that term, re-indigenize your mind. It helps me to be able to just see every human being as a life is equal to a life. Not one life is not worth more. Not one life is worth less. And so, no matter how that person presents, as long as they are a human being living, we deserve to make sure that their lives are preserved.
Mm.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, and that's how we hold ourselves within all of the indigenous cultures of Turtle Island, is that
Oh,
life is something to preserve and to cherish and cultivate. And like I said earlier, when we would fight amongst each other's tribes, it was taboo for us to kill people on the battlefield. It was against our own religion, spirituality, and our own customs. Um,
well, well, hang on. So I'm adding to your point because one thing I also learned was that even when you have to consume, like for instance, the meat of a buffalo, you would literally like be very careful and intentional with how you have. I hate to use the word slaughter, but you have to take
kill
out
the
the buffalo to consume for food. Not only did you consume the entire buffalo, but you used what you couldn't consume as tools, as clothing, what have you. But then you also thanked the buffalo for its life to help can preserve your life. And so there was a respect among all living things, even inanimate objects like rocks, like so high-minded that, and I mean high-minded in a very positive, aspirational way, that you even, saw the spirits within all objects around you. That's amazing.
Earlier, you said how we feel the land around us. You as a black freedman, and myself as an indigenous person, and I'm in my homeland. The trees that are around me are my relatives, not just as in a metaphorical, they're a living being, they're my relatives, but the monadoos of my previous relatives that have passed away are within the land, the soil, the beings that all are around us. So, for instance, when Line 3, Enbridge Line 3 pipeline was coming through Minnesota, they were taking down, clear cutting trees after trees after trees. That hurts me as spiritual person because we see those trees as relatives, but we also see those trees as medicine. And it's not your ibuprofen medicine, it's your spiritual medicine. It's your spiritual medicine. And when we talked about the drum earlier, if a woman drums on the drum, it could get someone sick. That, when those trees were being cut down, we were being affected. Our spirituality were being affected. Our bodies were being affected with our relatives being slaughtered and being butchered alongside of us. Those bison, those buffalo that you talked about, it goes further into not just giving respecting when you're harvesting and utilizing all of the parts. People thought we hunted buffalo. No, they followed us. We took care of the buffalo. They respected us. We respected them. So when we went to go harvest a buffalo for our food, for our tools, it was not just a thank you, it was farewell, my relative. Miigwech, thank you so much for what you are providing for our community and that nourishing food, that nourishing medicine that will be coming into us. Miigwech for your spirit, for being a part of us.
That is deep. That is so deep. Oh my gosh. But okay, so the nerdy side of me just got a little scientific in my head because when you said that your spirits are in there, I think about when a person passes. The laws of thermodynamics is that energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transferred. Meaning that energy goes somewhere. And also when we decompose, the elements of which we are go back into the ground and it may get absorbed by the grass, the trees, the plants, right? And then it also, you might have a buffalo that may eat that grass. and then that grass with our essence goes into the buffalo, and then that buffalo, which is also made up of it, say that buffalo is giving birth to a baby buffalo, and so that goes into the baby buffalo, and then next thing you know, that baby buffalo is birthed. And so it just, it's like it. I hate to say it like this because it sounds so cliche, but it really is the circle or cycle of life, and you're honoring the cycle. You're not trying to break it.
We lived in right relationships with all beings around us. And that's the key of indigenous knowledge and culture is how do we get back to that? That's been one of my biggest organizing efforts is how do we get back to the indigenous knowledge that we used to have prior to colonization? Because once we start adapting our indigenous morals and principles into all aspects of life, we can get in right relationship with what we are currently doing now and build ourselves off into a society of coexistence, not just with our animal relatives, not just with our trees, but also with those rivers, also with the mountains. Instead of clear cutting those mountains of those trees, instead of um, leveling those mountains for those minerals, we can find a way to be in right relationships and continue on this technological advancement that we are on currently. And it's just getting back to the indigenous knowledge and the indigenous wisdom that we once held, not just as Anishinaabe, not just as Native Americans, but indigenous peoples of Mama Key herself. I look at, sorry to distract or go down the rabbit hole a little bit, but I look at these data centers, and a large part of their energy consumption has to do with water waste, and then also which goes around, or the waste of the water, the contamination of the water has a lot to do with the cooling mechanism for those data centers, in which I look at the tribal people of Africa, who were able to make ice within the desert. How do you make ice within the desert? You have a building that collects the air to push it down underground where it's cooler underground. And since you have that circularization, it was frigid down there and they were able to make ice. Why aren't we implementing that knowledge within our current architecture for these projects to reduce the energy use, to reduce that the minerals and the fossil fuels that take to provide the energy, the water that they're contaminating? We could avoid all of that if we go back to those indigenous principles and our indigenous sciences.
Damn. You got me there. That was wow. Yeah,
So
that actually makes a whole lot of sense. Um, it just makes me think about a lot of the technological advances that were done by African tribes and nations in the past, and it was done in conjunction with our stewardship of the land. And then it makes me think about the agricultural advancement of Native American nations. So much so to the naked eye from a colonizer, they come here, they see these plants, and they're like, it's just wild brush. But no,
acorns, we're going to
absolutely
get
not.
poisoned. And it's like, oh, we know how to process acorns, James. You soak the terpenes out of it, and then you're able to make them into fry bread or make them into whatever, what have you. And you see that knowledge being stripped away from us because the colonizers want us stupid. They want us to consume their products. And we see across the globe how they are killing off biodiversity of our plants so
Hmm.
they can make these mass agricultural GMO corn and wheat and all of that, that eventually will lead us into genetically modifying our own bodies.
Hmm.
Um, Oh, I had something. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, well, I was just talking about how they saw the the agriculture that you guys have
Mm,
formed.
sorry.
Mhm.
That agriculture. So the whole continent was our garden. We had a conversation on timeshare on how the Anishinaabe provided nutrients for the Dakota's vegetation for when they have that area. That's not just the Dakota and the Anishinaabe, that was the tribes all across Turtle Island. We cultivated not a yard, we cultivated hundreds of miles of garden that fed more people than we have now prior to colonization. The food that we had prior to colonization, like just to rephrase, fed more people than we have now. And we had more people on this continent prior to colonization than we currently do now. And they were indigenous people. And our people only currently make up 2 to 5% of Turtle Island now.
That means 98% of the entire population of natives were wiped out.
Half of our tribal nations are genocides, and half of our tribe, or more than half of our tribal knowledge has been erased. And we, as learners, and we, as indigenous people of the world, are trying to reclaim that knowledge and find out what why we were able to thrive and exist for not just a decade, but for millennia before the colonizers came here. Stable existence for millennia, for centuries on centuries on centuries, James. And we can't do that now. We are struggling to feed people within our own local communities.
Yeah,
Over two-thirds of the United States are living in third world conditions.
yeah,
And we're saying that the United States is the richest nation of Mama Aki, Mother Earth. No, it's those white European settlers that honestly have no ties to this land. And once they've destroyed it, they will go back to their motherland with our wealth and with our resources and continue on with their toxic way of living, of extracting wealth, extracting time, and extracting labor from us. And if we're no longer here as Anishinaabe or as Black freedmen or as the other cultures of the earth, those white folks will do onto other or onto themselves as they've done to us, because they currently do that here in the United States. White supremacy harms more white people here in the United States than it harms any other race. The
yeah,
most people who sit in prison are white people. The most people who are killed by police officers are white people. The most people who are on credit card debt, medical debt, bankruptcy, mortgage foreclosure are white people. And food stamps, the most people on food stamps are white people. And these racists want to attack us, but they're harming their community more than us. Make
yeah,
it make sense. And
yeah,
to make it make sense, it is those billionaires that I just talked about who have no ties to this land and have no loyalties to this current government and the
yeah,
current structure that we have. So
yeah,
when we get back to indigenous culture, indigenous nations, and governance, we're talking about a stable society that believes in innovation and that has held a stable economics and governance for millennia.
wow,
It's time to go back to that. And that's where land back comes here. That's why we talk about land back, is because we have a track record of 5,000 plus years of build and growth and and coexistence with all beings on this planet. We need to get back to that.
yeah. I was talking to I forgot who I was talking to, but they were talking about how before colonization, because I live in Florida. They said Florida had so many trees that you can go from the west coast of Florida to the east coast of Florida, all under trees without actually having to see direct sky. Like that's how many trees it was. And the reason why the Spanish word, you know, for flowery is Florida, right? Um, and we didn't hear about famines or hunger when it comes to native tribes, Native American nations. We didn't hear about hunger. We didn't hear about people going without. You needed water, you lived probably near a water source. You needed, food, you literally had food sources all around you. So it's like why aren't we going back to that? Why we and this crazy part is we literally have the resources right there. We literally could just go, okay, let's go back to what this was 6, 7, 800 years ago. Let's go back to where this was so that we can get ourselves back to being sorry. You know, I think that it is, and I'm wrapping up here, but I think it is so powerful how we aren't using the available knowledge that we have, and we aren't learning from the people who could help us to actually get back to a way where we could lead a society successfully. It's like, well, how do we have a successful society? They already were here. It's just our nation wiped them out. We already had them here, and we still have the remnants of them here. I'm literally talking to one right now. Why aren't we having you guys be the architects and go, hey, this is what we need to do? And it's like, okay, we'll follow your plan because you guys have a 5,000-year track record of actually existing and thriving. So why don't we just do that? It feels idiotic to continue this, but then there's greed amongst the capitalists.
Yep. And there's only 3,000 of them. 3,000 billionaires within the United States, or excuse me, within the world, and about 1,000, 1,300, give or take, within the United States itself. And those original families that have been holding on to this wealth are the same families that came over after the first expeditions over here, over to Turtle Island, and they've never given up control. So to even consider that the United States is its own sovereign nation, I bulk at that. I rebulk that because I don't see that the United States is a sovereign nation. I see that we are a colony under Europe, and we've never lost that control of our European masters. So when they are done contaminating this land, destroying our people, they will leave it and leave all of us. And that's when we'll come as indigenous people of this land and the folks that are stuck here with us, and we will repatriate the land. We will regrow. And I hope that we don't have to wait that long. I truly hope that we don't have to wait that long, because we're talking about maybe another 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why my theory for change doesn't revolve around sitting on my ass and waiting. It's joining the movements. It's talking to people about our indigenous knowledge and wisdom and how we've engaged within these systems for millennia. And it's how we've engaged within this current system for 500 years and resisting back. And we won't get to that point of growth until we come together and coexist together. Yeah, we've thrived for time immemorial prior to colonization, and it's getting back to those original roots that we we as indigenous people of Mama Key know and have inherently know within our spirits, within our souls, and within our bodies. You were talking earlier how your body craves for the African continent, for your homeland. And I see that within the white culture themselves as well, is they are lost within this colonization effort. The largest demographic, the largest community that loses their culture and the fastest is the colonizers themselves, because they come in here and they are already our aggressor, which is not something that comes natural with any tribal person, and they lose themselves. That's why we no longer consider white people as Polish or Scandinavian, Norwegian. They're white. My husband, he refers to himself not as white anymore because white is a colonial term. He considers himself as a European American. And I support that because he's trying to find his own tribal roots himself and get back to where his culture was thriving as a community and as a society themselves. And he understands that colonization, Western colonization, is a framework of oppression and land grab and mineral grab for a small amount of people who are in power. And that small amount of people have been in power within Europe for centuries and have been in power within this continent for about 2 to 3 centuries. And we need to change that. That demographic of ownership will be changing through the representation of our population within the next 15 years, where we will no longer have a majority of European Americans anymore, but a majority of mixed immigrants to this nation. And to touch that a little bit, that was a part of colonial design itself. Um, through the laws that the white man made up to engage with their Native American tribes, they set up a system of how to gauge who can benefit off of the treaties that they had assigned. And the way that they assign that within the United States is through a blood quantum system, on which states how much of the lineage that you have within your bloodline to the original bloodlines of this nation. We are the only race on Mama Key that have our blood quantified so we can benefit as a nation itself, because we are all our own sovereign nations as tribal nations. We are not the United States. We are not the United States. My first citizenship is to my tribe, which is the Turtle Mountain Band of Anishinaabe, the Pemina Band of North Dakota, Minnesota. That's my first citizenship. That's where I give my patriotic pledge to, my loyalties to, and then second to that is the colonial state of the United States. And that's where we are at. Once we can come back to the original, or excuse me, through their design, they allowed themselves to marry in within our families. So earlier settling of this colony, so they can do further land grab from the land that we agreed upon that would be the indigenous people's land. They would marry into our families, and their children would take that land out of tribal trust, which the government set up a trust system for the land that was issued out to the indigenous folks, and then would put it into the white person's market within their industry, eroding our land. Those eventually descendants of the original people. Myself, I am 1/3 Anishinaabe, 1/3. I am 1/3 French, and then I'm 1/3 mix of different European nationalities. My children, if I choose to have children, will not qualify to be on the rolls of my tribal nation because of the American colonial laws that they had set up. Who can receive the who could be the beneficiaries of these treaties? And we are the only ones that are considered like dogs to have certain amount of bloodlines within us and that are being registered as such. We talk about Palestine and the colony that is within Palestine. Their people over there, the Israelis, excuse me for a lack of a appropriate word on this platform that I would rather use, but they're not they banned DNA testing within Israel because they understand that the majority of their people don't have blood ties. There are pros and cons to this system because if we actually do blood ties to the Palestinian Christian Muslims and Jewish folks there, we would actually be able to follow the lines back to Jesus Christ. The majority Israelis are from the Caucasus Mountains. They have no ties to Jesus Christ. They have no ties to the original tribes of that area. They are colonial people in a colonial space.
I
And
mean, if we're thinking about it, they actually have more ties to Caesar than they do Jesus.
yeah, they do. I part of my 1/3 is Jewish lineage out of Kiev, Ukraine. Currently, when my family was there, it was part of the USSR. They immigrated from there 1901, around 1910, around that period. Um, and I don't claim that I have any descendancy to Palestine, even though I have blood claims to a Jewish line within the European Jewish families. There is no blood ties to that land for me. The prominent blood ties for my body, for my spirituality, for my lineage is Turtle Island, in particularly where I'm at within Minnesota, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and further east. And my body aches for me to be here. When I travel to, say, Florida or to the West Coast, my body knows I'm in the wrong spot. It says, Joe, go back home. You're not where you're supposed to be, Joe. And those European allies feel that deep down. They've lost themselves. They've lost their culture. They are there only to preserve this colonial state for those billionaires that we talked about. And when will this change? James, we talked about it before. You know that I'm one of the bigger pushers for a general strike, and I'm not just calling for one general strike. I'm calling for a series, an era of general strikes, and it doesn't have to look like the Minneapolis general strike over almost 100 years ago, where it was labor. It could look like prior to that general strike, where the communities came together and they were the focal point. And when you acknowledge that it is the communities and not just your labor unions that are striking, you understand that we are actually currently in that era of general strikes. And we are nearing a pivotal point within this current society that we could push into a revolutionary change, a systematic change if we continue forth. But we understand as revolutionaries that it's the job of the establishment to tone us down, to take away the breath under our sails. And if we allow ourselves to fight white supremacy with white supremacist tactics, we're only going to pull our own selves down. So rather than fighting with white supremacist tactics and hate and bigotry towards our white allies or the other communities of Turtle Island, of Mama Key, we need to understand that we don't have to be friends. We don't have to agree on everything on 100%. What we have to do is learn what solidarity is and learn how to mind our own dang business. And when I say that, it's like we talked about homosexuality and how that is a newer thing over the last 100 years, 120 years. It's because we didn't know how to mind our own business. They told us it's your business to be in someone else's bedroom. Well, if we just allow a person to be their hateful self and say, hey, I don't care who you are, I don't care what you believe. If you're not with me, sit down, shut up, and don't involve yourself. Mind your own business. Let us do what we need to do to get things right. I'm not asking for unity. I mean, look at Fred Hampton Sr., the Black Panthers working with the Young Lords, working with the Triple K group. And they didn't ask for that last group to 100% agree with them, but they told them, if you have something not nice to say, shut the F up. Mind your own business. Leave it where you are. If you bring that stuff here, we're going to boot you out. And they were able to work together to get common issues done. That's where we need to get to within our current society, rather than fighting between blue and red. We need to unite under our current intersecting issues.
As far as the Black Panther Party working with the Young Patriots, they actually told them, if you want to work with us, then you're going to have to change your white supremacist ways and get rid of your white supremacist iconography in order to be able to unite with us, because you cannot actually advance without us. And so they did. There were some people in the Young Patriots that actually left because they did not want to get rid of the white supremacist views that they held in the iconography, being the Confederate flag. And so even some Black Panthers left because they still couldn't accept the Young Patriots changing their ways and then having solidarity with them. So even though they did unite with them, the Young Patriots had to change their ways and do a sort of decolonization of their collective minds in order to be able to reunite with the Black Panthers, because people who are marginalized, if you're not going to respect our existence, then, we can't unite with you because you're not going to honor our existence at all. And so you can actually turn on us. So, that's one thing I will definitely say is, they pushed them into that position. And because the Young Patriots realized they can't do it without uniting, and you cannot unite without throwing your bigotry away in that respect.
Thank you for that context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On that note, we do need to unite under the common causes that we do champion within our communities, that we all champion, and we do need to move forward within an era of civil unrest. General strikes is the word I use, but when we get down to it, it is civil unrest. It is economic strikes that we're talking about, though. And to an extent, I don't need other communities to be 100% on board with mine. I need those communities to either stand the heck down or join us. because I'd rather have you stand down instead of putting a thumb on our progress, when we all know that what we're trying to do won't only just benefit my community, but it will benefit your community and all the communities around us. And that's the crux of indigenous knowledge and indigenous morality, is that we truly want to coexist as not one nation, but as several nations on top of each other, around each other, inter, in, coexisting with each other and not colonizing one another.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. That is a beautiful point that I think that we need to learn more from. My hope is that we can get to a point not only where we can liberate the United States, liberate
Mm,
this land, and being assistance in helping you liberate this land.
mm,
But my hope is that your numbers grow and explode back to the way it was before. Um, I'm, I am wishing that, because that type of existence is more beautiful than what we have now. And that's something that I'm really hoping for, because in the end, having a symbiotic relationship with each other means that the world wins, and that's what I want. I want the world winning, because if the world wins, that means life not only continues, but life becomes more abundant.
mm. When I talked about the data center issue earlier,
Hmm.
we were talking about how our technology should coexist with all beings around us.
Hmm.
And in my perfect world, we are based off of microeconomies and micro governments, and
Hmm.
with individual sovereignty within within those units. And how we get to that level is we integrate our scientific knowledge within being in right relationships with all beings around it. And that brings me to where we've talked before, biomaterials. We could replace all aspects of our common day goods and our industrial goods with biomaterials that could be grown within your local area, milled within your local area, and then produced and manufactured into components and then sold within your local area. And that is a community building um, platform. And then also that is a local sovereignty issue. Is when you have your supply chains and your economy based off of a local area, you're able to thrive as that local area, and then you're not at the whims of a larger body if they're going on a good or bad role within their economy or society. We to get to the coexistence with everybody, and to be in the right relationships with everybody, it would have to be if we took out all systems of caste within not just Turtle Island, but across Mama Key, the whole entire world. We are talking about taking out caste when we are transitioning over to a biomaterial area, industry and economy, because you are no longer dependent on these monopolies extracting the wealth, minerals, and fossil fuels from lower economically impoverished areas and nations, but you're allowing that shared technological growth of those microeconomy technologies of economy to happen all across Mama Key simultaneously. And I think about it as like two or 3 years ago, China was trying to bypass U.S. sanctions to tap into the Venezuelan oil by offering Venezuela the opportunity for microgrids across Venezuela, microgrid electricity, solar panels, so forth. We see in the United States that we have three grids across the United States: the West, the East, and Texas grid systems. And if one system goes down, you have not just one state or one community going down, you have a third of the nation going down, a third of this colony going in without power. We have such a system in place because of capitalism and the need for that extraction of wealth at a mass level.
Right.
If you eradicate that system of mass wealth extraction and go into the microeconomies, the local sovereignty, then you won't have the ability for those billionaires to engage anymore to steal that wealth from that community, because they don't have the internal pressures of the economic oppression making their decisions for them. I know I just rambled off a good one right there, but in saying that, that's where sovereignty comes in. A
Yeah.
huge word in indigenous nation is indigenous sovereignty. And oh, I love that word, because that to me is liberty. That is justice. That is equality and equity. And I would love to see that not just within my own hometown of Bemidji, but my state of Minnesota, but of Turtle Island, of Mama Key. And that's how we truly end the wars, the caste system, the extraction of other people's wealth and minerals and land. And that's how we come to a society where we can engage and coexist, not just within our local areas, but as a national and global community.
Wow. Man, this conversation is deep. Mm.
I am an indigenous revolutionary, and I've been starting to appreciate that term and that title that has been thrusted upon me. And that allows me the ability to dream where we could actually go, James, and we could go a long way as several cultures together. We
Yeah.
just need to get there. And to get there, we need to break up the current system we have.
Yeah.
And it needs to not be reformed into something new. It needs to be torn down and replaced with the old knowledge that has been sustainable for millennia. And that's indigenous knowledge of Turtle
Mhm.
Island and of Mama Key itself, Mother Earth.
I know this is kind of a cheeky comment, but it's kind of, going deeper when you think about it. When you think about it, you're kind of old fashioned,
I
you
love
know?
it. It's the
We're not talking about like
ancestral
old colonial
knowledge.
fashion. We're talking about like indigenous old fashioned, like going
Mm.
back to indigenous roots.
Well, I think the crux of this conversation has been around the fact that the indigenous knowledge, not just of Turtle Island, but Mama Key, is the way that we all should be going back to. It is
Yeah.
that local control, that local conversation, and that local democracy.
Hmm. Let me ask you this. This about to get a little nerdy up in here. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I hope you can say yes to this. You ever played the game Final Fantasy VII?
2, 3, 10 and a half.
Okay.
10 and 10 and a half.
Okay.
More of a Sega and then also
Okay.
Xbox.
The reason why I ask is because in Final Fantasy VII, there is a fictional indigenous nation or peoples within the game they called them the Agents, but the Agents called themselves the Cetra. And they were in the game, they were the stewards of the planet. And they shared their knowledge of how everything blends and coincides with everything. So the knowledge of the planet, like if one person dies, that energy gets transferred, and the matter gets transferred, and it turns into another person. And when you think about it, and then on top of that, one of the characters in Final Fantasy VII, his name is Red 13. Everybody knows him as Red 13, but his actual indigenous name is Nanaki. It's kind of interesting how he kind of looks like almost like a mix between like a lion and a dog, kind of mixed between that, and his tail has a fire flame. But the music, if you ever get a chance to listen to Cosmo Canyon music, it looks a lot like Arizona in the layout. And then the music is very extremely Native American inspired. It's a beautiful song. And everybody in the area is very warm and welcoming and cheery and loving in that area of the game. And that's when you learn about the planet and how how it really operates, how you find out about how the Mako, what they call the life stream, operates. And it just makes me think about that, like the ancients and the Cetra, and how they were wiped out, and there's only one left who is one of the heroes of the game. And so it's just like life, art imitates life, right? If you ever get a chance to, I know you're very busy with doing a lot of serious stuff on the ground, but if you ever get some leisure time, I think you should pick up Final Fantasy VII. Pick up the original, right? You can get the original like on PS4 or something like that. But play the original, and especially when you get to Cosmo Canyon, you might shed a tear because that's how deep it goes. It's beautiful.
I'm gonna have to check it out. Probably will pirate that sucker and put it on a computer or something. I can not mod it. Anyway,
you might be able to. I mean, yeah.
It's. Wouldn't you be happy if you knew you had a place in this world and you know how to engage with it, how to grow plants, how to feed yourself, how to take care of your family, and not have to worry about if you're going to have money to pay your rent, if you're going to have money to pay for food? Wouldn't you be happy? And that's the indigenous knowledge that we're talking about is how to be truly happy in this world, and it's getting back to this
Yeah.
world. It's getting back to Mama Aki. And I'm happy generally in my life. We know we consume, you and I, and a lot of people who watch us consume a lot of negativity. It's grounding yourself within your morals, within your spirituality, and within your culture. Not just, indigenous culture, it's all cultures. If you ground yourself within yourself, you can, you are going to be a happier person. We find that when we are out of balance with the world, that our society itself is out of balance. Our economy, our governance, our way of living is out of balance. And I like that you called me like old school. It's knowing that we were happy, not just you and I, but our people were happy, truly, and growing, technologically advancing, scientifically advancing, knowing the stars, knowing how to make 500-mile long gardens that would thrive for millions of people, and not having to worry about the struggle of day-to-day life, not worrying about where am I going to get my next paycheck from.
Yeah.
And when we get back to that decentralized way of living, I think we will truly find our societies being happier again and thriving once again. And as we're stuck within this megalith of Western expansion and colonialism, we will only find ourselves at each other's throats, trying to kill one another because some rich billionaire across the continent or across the world is telling us to. And that's no way to live. That is no way to live, and that's not what your ancestors wanted you to live by, and that's not what my ancestors wanted us to live by, and nor is that our white allies' ancestors how they wanted to live by. So we truly, as a society, need to go back in time, and not back in time to the 1900s, but we're talking about back in time prior to colonization of Turtle Island, prior to the colonization of Europe, prior to the colonization of Asia and Africa, where we were communities, we were families within society, and that we coexisted not just with human body, but we coexisted with the Mississippi River, the Lake Superior, or even the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah.
We need to get back to that way of thinking. We need to get back to that way of living, and we need to we need to tear down this current structure and put back the original structures that we had as tribal people.
I almost cried. You almost got me.
I'll get you next time. I'm promising.
Yeah. That question was so, oh my gosh, that question was so powerful. I really, gosh, this has been one of my most favorite conversations with you. It's really just getting back to our humanity.
Yeah.
What makes us part of this planet, right?
Our being, not just humanity, our being.
Yeah.
Because it's being in right relationships with all beings around us.
Yeah.
That being could be that Mississippi River, or that being could be you and I.
Yeah.
And I bring that up into this conversation, and this will be the last point I can afford today, but I would love to carry this on soon. But beings around us. We are fighting here in Minnesota to protect our wild rice, which is a keystone species, not just for the Anishinaabe, but for the Minnesota economy. And when we live in right relationships, it's not genetically modifying our plants. It's understanding that this plant thrives as it is. It thrives where it's at. And as long as we take care of it, it will take care of us. We need to not just consider human supremacy. We need to do away with human supremacy. We need to
Oof.
go to respecting all beings that the creators gave us and being the rightful custodians and guardians of Mama Ki herself, because that's what the original teachings of my spirituality, and I'm assuming very well that is the teachings of your original tribal roots and all people's tribal roots, was to take care of all beings around us. And then we can have the buffaloes following us and being family with us. And when it's time for us to harvest one of them, we 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 thank them. We cry and grieve for them, and we honor them by using all parts of them. Again, Chi Miigwech, which means thank you very much, JB, James. I love both names. I wish I could give you more time, but I'm vibing that the work group that I'm supposed to be working with today are all filtering out of the building, so they must be done. And my area is about to get very loud.
All right.
So, Miigwech
No,
again.
thank you so very much. This was a beautiful conversation. I have learned so much. I hope to have you back on so we can have more conversations like this. Thank you.
We ain't done. I'll be back on. I promise you that. You love me too much. You're gonna get more of me in the near future. So Chimigwij again, Gigawagam and Minowa. Thank you everybody for watching this clip in this interview between James and myself. And make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, please. Just had to give you a shout out.
Thank you.
Gigawagaman.
Hey, you just watched a Kind Connections podcast. Thanks so much for watching. If you would like to see more, you can click right here. And thank you so very much. And don't forget, hit subscribe.